here we are with a revitalized, revamped look into how to play each of the nations. This video is going to take a look at the Fire Nation, the very first nation ever devised. A PvP-oriented nation that has a supreme food economy revolving around its volcanoes. They give them both a combat boost and an economic boost in the food department. Couple that with discounted armies once you get to tier 2, your opponent is going to find it very difficult to deflect your attacks because you can attack from multiple angles as the Fire Nation. And so, the Fire Nation is going to come at you within the opening turns with Battle Cry, one of the strongest tier 1 abilities in the game, and then keep on hitting you because their quest is simply to win battles no matter the size of it. So let's take a dive into all of their abilities and take a look at how they attack the board. Here we have Fire's abilities all sorted for us, tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3. And first, we're going to kick it off with the big card and take a look at their strengths that they have by default. First off, you have discounted armies. And so for that reason, you want to really be able to flood the board. And so your food economy is going to be something of a priority. But on top of that, we also get +2 added to our offensive dice roll for every volcano that we have. It's actually the only +2 bonus that is in the game outside of advantage cards. This is the only +2 inherent environmental advantage. And so now we look at Fire's very, very flexible abilities because they have a lot of matchup-dependent cards. For example, if someone picks Glacier at the 20-20 spot and you're 16-16 or 13-13, well, you have the capability of melting those blizzards. Or if Nature is able to sleek through with a really, really strong corner, you can actually get rid of Forest and Rainforest and just really remove their potential for that later game strategy. On top of that, you can also enhance your own economic standing. And so tier 1 is really about establishing your territory, making your mark, but also you are equipped with one of the most aggressive abilities in the game. In my opinion, this is a top 3 tier 1 ability in the game. Battle Cry allows us to move 2 tiles, but we must attack. And this is only from 1 tile. But this is what allows us to get the jump on an opponent that maybe wasn't expecting it. But in my opinion, this is best served to wait until tier 1. And so what are we looking for? Well, what we're looking to try to do is on turn 3, we want to hit tier 2. We really have to do that as Fire. If we're not able to, we're in a really tough spot. And ideally what we want to do is we want to utilize secondary succession, which is going to double the amount of food produced by every tile that touches a volcano. And so now that we're thinking a few turns ahead, what is an ideal corner for Fire? Well, we've got your perfect corner right here. When a mountain is touching that capital tile and all these food tiles around it, this is perfect for Fire. What are we going to be able to do? We can utilize our Vulcanize, which is going to give us an offensive buff, but also give us that volcano in place for secondary succession. But also, if we look at this corner down here, this isn't as ideal because it's not a mountain and it's not touched by all food-giving tiles. But you'll find that doubling 3 or 4 food-giving tiles is perfect for this ability. So even though this is a desert and not a mountain, not to fear, because we have Ring of Fire, a tier 2 ability that allows it to turn any tile into a volcano. And so that is really what your opening turns are trying to do. You're really trying to occupy all of these tiles around your capital, especially all the food-giving ones, and we want to establish 1 volcano. And so if I had to establish abilities that you're going to take every single time, it's absolutely going to be Battle Cry for tier 1. Really, all of these other ones are sort of matchup dependent and also turn position dependent. If you're going to be 10-10 or 13-13 and pick Fire, then you're probably going to take Priority Strike. Priority Strike is a very turn-dependent card, but it allows us to get a half-price tile and get a soldier on it, so we don't have to purchase a barracks in order to establish a presence on the board. And so if I'm going 10-10 or 13-13, I'm looking at something like this over here. I get a Rainforest for half price, 3-3, and get a free soldier on it, which would allow me to expand on the board. These are the kinds of things I'm looking at in a corner for Fire. And so I really do like Fire at the 10-10 or 13-13 position, but of course anyone can exploit 16-16 or 20-20 and just really take advantage of that early economy. I really love Fire's new war capability, because I do think Fire is one of the primary contenders for the middle of the board, and their new monument is going to make them a very, very strong contender for star tiles. That's the strategy that we want to emphasize here. But although this is emphasizing the star tile, it's just a discounted tile that could also be touching our volcano. For 2-2, we get a lake that is going to produce twice as much food. And although we really don't need that much building materials, we want to be able to put resource buildings on our food producing tiles so that when we hit turn 3, that turn we're making 20 plus food, which will allow us to make 2 plus armies in the following turn and hopefully battle cry into a boss or into an opponent that doesn't expect it. And so if we're looking at abilities that we're taking most of the time, battle cry is a must-have. War Camp and Priority Strike are dependent upon what your strategy and matchups are going to be. Vulcanize is something that you're typically going to take. And then Primitive Napalm is a very situational matchup. And so I'm looking at these as my top 5 tier 1 options here. Primitive Napalm is excellent to take when you're going into someone with a strong defensive bonus. Maybe water, which if we're squaring off against water, we think we're targeting water, we probably shouldn't be picking fire in the first place. But this is really, really good against earth or metal. Someone that is really able to dig in, because all of these defensive fortification and home field advantage bonuses are slashed in half. This is really, really, really strong for us. And so I'm looking at these two being taken most of the time, with these 3 as a flex spot. But also, with volcanoes being a counter to us in the form of magma being able to teleport to volcanoes, Vulcanize might not be something that you prioritize. You could go fire without any volcanoes, which sounds very, very difficult, but it can be done. But if you're squaring off against magma or one of your own counters, and we don't want to mention, or we don't want to fail to mention, this new tier 1 Searing Medallion as well. This is one of the few things that's going to allow a tier 1 threat move in 2 different directions. If you're coming at your opponent on the short side, you could get your general to move up and around this position up here in order to flank the opponent, because a strength of 15 is not to be ignored in the early game, especially if your opponent that you're going after isn't very aggressive or isn't really unit based. And so 15, that's a low roll on an army. That's incredible. And so if you're able to dig into some tile and own it, that's an extra 5 onto your defensive bonus there. And then also, you can put defensive fortifications. And then your general is a force to be reckoned with when you've got units tearing down the short side with battle cry and probably a volcano in your corner. It's really, really difficult to ignore you. And so you've got some great early game aggression. And so we've got these 2 as our tier 1s that we are usually taking, but these are our flex spot for our 3rd spot. If we're 10-10, then I really like War Camp and Priority Strike. Let's go ahead and save Ring of Fire for tier 2 in order to pop our secondary succession, because we need these early game advantages to stay economically relevant when we're at a disadvantage in the opening turns. And so your tier 2 is super flexible depending on what your matchup is. If you've got Glacier on the short side or on the long side away from you, well, then you're absolutely taking Defrosting to get rid of their strongest asset, which are their Blizzard tiles. And so if Glacier is not in the game, obviously not taking this ability. On top of that, if you're squaring off against nature, well, then you've got Slash and Burn farming to contend with their strongest assets, their forests or their rainforests. And so you got 2 matchup dependent cards there. Let's go ahead and separate those out here. Bam, bam, boom. But your tier 2 that you're primarily going to be sticking with is Ring of Fire, Secondary Succession. And if you're not really worried about your matchups at all, well, then you can go a full economic strat and take Heated Expansion, which is going to allow you to put a second resource building on another tile that is producing twice as much food, and you just have food coming out of every orifice on the body, and you're unstoppable in terms of the armies that you can produce. And so you're a massive force to be reckoned with. But on top of that, if we get a volcano in the middle of the board, Blanket and Ash is what allows us to make it a stronghold and very, very difficult to attack us with the enemies. On top of that, we also have their new Monument Expanded Territory. Monuments are very new to the game. This is a very aggressive strategy. If we're worried about not being able to maintain this volcano or secondary succession, Expanded Territory is going to, 1, give us an additional volcano. And so I really like the idea of removing Ring of Fire here, going Expanded Territory, and taking, where do we go? Blanketed in Ash. And this is going to be very aggressive for us in the middle of the board and give us lots of bonuses. For every battle that we win, we gain +5 food. And upon winning a star tile, which conveniently is 2 tiles away from your first star tile, aka Battle Cry, we can cruise through any neutral landmark tile in the middle and attack it. We get Battle Cry back. So if we use Battle Cry to attack someone, we immediately recycle it to win it back. And we can just rinse and repeat until we get 3 star tiles. Or if we're grinding for the late game, we're usually taking our quest here, which has one of the easiest quests to accomplish. This is just 2 turns of battles when you hit tier 3. And it doesn't matter what the level of battles are. You don't have to slay 3 armies with this battle. It could be a naked tile, and it counts. And so we're almost always taking our quest there, but that means we have to play for the late game, which means once we go tier 2, we have to save enough food to go tier 3, and we're almost not spending BM in order to get to the tier 3 stage. Then on top of that, tier 3, we've got a few options here. Hori's Gambit is going to allow us to pincer movement, which I really, really like this. It's a newer ability. And then on top of this, we get to capitalize our increased food production and train more and more armies so we can go for that 10 army win condition. On top of that, you got some matchup-dependent tier 3s as well. Rakan's Wrath, named after the Fire General. We can nuke a Water's River, removing 3 river tiles, which is going to deny their quest. And on top of that, we can discard as many advantage cards as we like, and for each, spawn an army on your general. If you got 3 advantage cards in the hand, if you got 3 armies and 2 or 3 volcanoes at your disposal, there's not a boss or enemy on the board that can contend with you. And so, these are the primary abilities that you're looking at with Fire, and these are the corners that you're looking at, the starts you're looking at for Fire. Look for those nature matchups, those glacier matchups. Try to avoid the water matchups. You're pretty good against air. And then Poison. Poison is built to cripple you in terms of manpower, and so Fire typically wants to avoid that. That being said, you do have a leg up on them in terms of aggression, so perhaps you can beat them to the punch. That is the insider's perspective on how to play the very first nation, the Fire Nation.